and joining me in the studio to talk about British and Irish identities as we move through this Brexit process are the former Ulster Unionist leader Mike Nesbitt and the columnist Fintan O'Toole. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Let's just deal with this Festival of Britain 2022 first of all. Cynical electoral politics, Fintan?
Of course. And more than that, though, it's also a kind of panicky reaction to the ultimate realisation that what Brexit has done, of course, is that it has both expressed and made considerably worse the deep, deep fracture within the Union itself. And so it's really part of what you do, what politicians do when they're in a complete panic mode, which is distract and deny. There's something kind of pathetic about it. It really underlines the fact that what we've seen over the last couple of months is instead of dealing with the underlying divisions, the underlying fracturing of the Union that has fed into Brexit, Britishness is being used in a kind of fantasy way as a flag under which everybody is going to rally and it's all going to be okay, and it's not.
Mike, do you see it as a pathetic distraction?
Well, what I do see is the need to, in some way, mark the centenary of Northern Ireland as a state, and I think we should do that. And I think we should do it by celebrating the people, the musicians, the sports people, the Nobel Prize winners, the engineers, the business people. And that's not going to be sectarian. That's going to be embracing the whole of the people of this part of the world.
There would be some people, and you don't need me to tell you this, who would see any attempt to mark, celebrate, commemorate the 100th anniversary of this state, country, region, call it whatever you want, they would find that thoroughly distasteful.
Yeah, but we're all committed to a shared future. And one way to do it is to move beyond the sectarianism and say, there was a great musician, there was a great sports person. One may have been a nationalist, one may have been a unionist, one may have been Protestant, one may have been Catholic. That is not the point. It was the genius that they demonstrated to the world. And you go around the world, people know about Northern Ireland, people know about Ireland, and generally speaking, it's very positive when you talk about the high achievers.
Fintan, I suppose the question is, can you separate out politics from identity? Can you do what Mike is talking about doing without getting dragged into the mire of identity politics?
To some extent, of course you can, and I have absolutely no problem with Mike's idea of celebrating achievement, and I think this should be done. Remember, 1922, if that's what we're talking about, is a centenary of a very, very fundamental shift in the nature of the Union as a whole. You know, with the setting up of the Irish Free State and the foundation of Northern Ireland, it changed the nature of the Union. But if it's done as a denial of the fact that the nature of the Union is also changing very, very radically right now. So it's a kind of retro idea that we can go back to a point and celebrate a kind of nostalgic Britishness. If you look at what's actually happening, there's a very simple fact, which is that there's now, of the 4 regions of the United Kingdom, there is one left where a plurality of people, not even a majority, just the biggest number of people in all the big surveys that have been going on for years, only one left where a plurality of people say they are British. And that's in Northern Ireland. A plurality of people in England, 60% of English people in the 2011 census said they were English, not British. Similarly, a majority in Scotland, a majority in Wales. So Britishness is in very deep trouble. And the idea of the Union as some kind of static entity which can be celebrated and rallied behind is a complete denial of what's actually happened in Brexit, Brexit is an English national revolution. It was the English people rising up and saying that they want to be recognised as a separate political community. And this has profound consequences for the Union, which are not being addressed. So to start talking about the Union when actually English nationalism is the big thing that we're seeing is just another exercise in denial.
So, Mike, Fintan's thesis is that Brexit has awakened something very dangerous, potentially, for Northern Unionists, people like yourself. Do you see that danger? Do you identify with what Fintan's outlining there?
I think there is a danger for those of us who refuse to define our identity in the binary sense of we are British or Irish. I mean, I would be with the poet John Hewitt, who said, I'm not only an Ulsterman, I'm also Irish, British and European. And the important part of that was he went on to say, if you deny any part of that, you diminish who I am. Now, I liked being European. I liked being part of the European Union. I accept the result is the result. But there would be many people, particularly nationalists, who feel that they have been diminished, and in a way that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement said could not possibly happen. Because, of course, the agreement said you and only you define your identity. So if they're defining their identity in that multiplicity of I'm Irish and I'm European, somebody else came in and voted to deny
so
the
what do you do? Because the
Europeanness.
political reality is that, as things stand, the UK, including Northern Ireland, is
coming
leaving
out.
the EU in March of next year.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge those who feel that they have been diminished by their vote in terms of their identity.
Including yourself.
And then we work to try and rectify it. And I think to have binary identity is not only incredibly unhelpful as we try to get our political process going again, I don't think it's actually that honest, Mark. How many pure Gaels and pure Brits are there on this island? If you go out to the battlefields and the cemeteries of the First World War in France, you will see a lot of people whose descendants alive today would be Republicans. I'm sure Fintan probably has people in
Absolutely.
his past.
Yeah.
I completely agree with Mike, because we were getting to a point in the tangled history of these islands. Around 2011, 2012, you could say, in spite of all the political difficulties, that on the ground and in practice, it was kind of over. The sort of neurotic way of dealing with all of this sort of stuff, as if, we didn't know who we were, but we knew we weren't you. And we could define ourselves by who we were not. We were getting to a point where people were beginning to define themselves by the actuality of their real existence, which is quite complex and ambiguous, rather than through these binaries, as Mike says. The problem is, and the DUP has to take enormous responsibility in this, by driving for a hard Brexit, you are forcing people back into those binary identities. And this is why stopping Brexit should be, if I was a unionist, I would be saying, Brexit is doing more to encourage a United Ireland. It's doing more to encourage Catholics to go back into a monolithic identity than the IRA achieved in 30 years of horror. And this is grossly irresponsible. It pays no attention at all to the way in which history has been unfolding. And it's now going back into this kind of ridiculous retro-Britishness, the blood red line. The blood red line is a very thin red line. And if you refuse to recognise that something fundamental is happening to Britishness, to unionism, then you're not doing yourself any favours.
On the one hand then, so the theory goes, Mike, we're being driven back into corners. We're not able to have that ladder of identity that people, you referred to John Hewitt, have clung to in the past. And yet this evening we've had Mary Lou McDonald, the Sinn Féin president, speaking at the University of Liverpool, where she's made it clear that in her view, if there's a new united Ireland, people will still be British citizens in that place. She said we need to define a new relationship with Britain. There are those in the north who are proud to be British citizens. They will remain British citizens in a new and united Ireland. Is that helpful?
Well, that's exactly what the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP and the others negotiated in 1998.
Yeah, but you haven't heard too many Sinn Féin presidents saying it in the past.
Well, yes, OK, and yes, it's to be welcome, but I'm just saying it's entirely consistent with what we negotiated 20 years ago. It's just the kind of negative image of it. You can be in this part of the United Kingdom and Irish. If there was to be a united Ireland, yeah, of course it's welcome that she would acknowledge that people would remain to be British. I mean, we're not going away, and that's the challenge. If we get cryogenically frozen for 5, 10, 15 years and we come back, there's still going to be Republicans, there's still going to be nationalists, unionists, loyalists and others on this little piece of planet Earth. How are we going to share it out?
And the European Union has been a crucial part of allowing people to get towards a point where they feel, look, yes, we've got these different identities. They are very ambiguous and mobile, but also we've got a shared thing there's a shared space that we're part of. And this is why it is utterly, utterly reckless, I think, for unionism to try to move into this kind of ludicrous rhetoric which we heard again tonight about a global Britain and all this kind of nostalgia for empire. It's trying to reinvent an idea of Britishness that is just not coming back. And if you tie yourself to a fantasy, then you're actually destroying your own identity. And my worry is actually that unionists are going to find that the rug is being pulled from under them in very dangerous ways. What we need actually is exactly what Mike is talking about. We need to have a space whereby unionism can feel comfortable, can feel open, and where more people like Mike can say, I'm happy with a dual identity. Yeah. But that's not what Brexit's doing. It's forcing people back into these very, very monolithic, frozen, clapped out identities.
And I have to emphasise, Fintan, I accepted there was going to be a UK-wide vote in or out, and I have to accept the result. But I do, at the time when I was saying we should vote for Remain, there were a lot of reasons, but one was I didn't understand what Brexit looked like, and I still don't. And I don't understand people who thought that the remaining EU 27 would sit round the table and say, you know what, we have got to give better trading conditions to the United Kingdom than we're giving ourselves. Are these new markets that the UK talks about going and exploring, are the EU 27 so stupid they don't know where those markets are and they're not exploring them?
Well, we've explored what is a very complex subject in a very short period of time tonight, and I suspect we've probably raised more questions than we've answered. But thank you both very much indeed for joining us tonight.